So earlier today, I actually woke up this morning and stumbled out of bed, but then I stood up a bit too fast just to trip on the chair I'm actually currently sitting in, and I nearly hit my head on the corner of the piano bench. It's actually 2 feet to my left right now. I ended up on the floor in fetal position pulling a Peter Griffin because I was just gripping my knees in pure agony. Now, you may be wondering where the fuck am I going with this, but here's the thing. You may have experienced something similar in your own TFT games, where dizziness can cause immense mental and even physical pain. So in today's video, we're going to try to prevent that from ever happening again with none other than a VOD showcasing how Rank 1 Vietnam YBY1 never gets dizzy. Let's get on to today's video. Okay, so here we go. We are inside of YBY1's game. Now, this was actually taken from day 1 of the Project PvE Major, which is a tournament that yours truly is hosting. There's a lot of fantastic players who are currently playing in it right now. We had Tidal, who's playing in it on day 1. We had YBY1 playing in it. We have Cash, who is Rank 1 Brazil, also Rank 1 Global at a certain point. Really fantastic player. Faker Fangirl is actually Fora Talient, also a very fantastic player from Brazil as well. And a bunch of other just incredible players. We have some Chinese players in here as well in this particular lobby, but just fantastic players across the board. The day 2 major, by the way, the checkmate portion of the event is in a lot of time. We're recording this in 3 hours, so hopefully you're going to be there to join us. It's at 10 a.m. Eastern on the 30th, but if you're able to join us for that day, I'd highly love to have you there. We've had so many people interested in spectating and watching the event. There's also a Chinese broadcast if you want to go check that out. But let's talk about the game a little bit. Looks like 2-1, we get a Mordekaiser and a Fiddle out of the orbs, and so we do have a Zyra pair on bench. We do have the potential for Techie as well with the Veigar in shop as well. But this Techie line in general has been very lackluster. You don't see a lot of players playing around the vertical, especially not a lot of 4 Techie during the early game, unless you're at least level 5, because you do want a bit more of that front line for your board. I do see the Veigar here is fine, but I don't think a lot of players will actually end up holding it. I think it's close, but most of the time it's not going to be a thing. 2-1 augments as well. Let's talk about it. We got Bulky Buddies, Iron Assets, and Placebo. Now, before we do anything with our augments here, the encounter is actually very important, and let's talk about it. The hacked egg encounter. On stage 4, you are offered an egg that'll hatch at specific turn intervals. I believe there's 3 different ones. One hatches super early, but one hatches super late, and obviously the more time it takes to hatch it, the better the rewards. So typically in this kind of encounter, you actually kind of want to play for a lot of HP preservation, because hacked eggs hatch faster when you lose. So starting stage 4, you really want to start losing if possible. You don't want to open your board, but you want to be able to lose comfortably without worrying about dying from the game. So that does mean HP preservation is the name of the game here. So even though out of these options, I actually really like Placebo in general for most encounters, like 99% of them. Encounter is great because, or not encounter, sorry. Placebo is great because it gives you so much that starting goal to really hit those early econ breakpoints and really start pushing your econ and getting you to wherever you need to be. Especially we have very little economy right now, right? This is not the time to take it, because if we're comparing, you know, other augments like Bulky or Iron Assets here, Iron Assets sounds really great. You get 2 item slams, which would be super nice. It's probably what I would lean in this spot. Bulky Buddies is fine later down the line, but it's weaker in the early game because you have less units that you can utilize on your board. So not the biggest fan of Bulky or Placebo here. I'd actually reroll left and right if I were YBY1, and then I'm kind of interested to see what he ends up taking here. I don't exactly remember. We get 1 for all on the right and over encumbered on the left. Now, over encumbered kind of follows the same philosophy of it's not stronger now, but it's stronger later. So I could see an argument for over encumbered being that right now our current board is just not particularly that strong. So if we were to take over encumbered, we're kind of saying, hey, on 3-2 we're going to be strong, and that's when we're going to really be able to tempo. So I could see over encumbered. I'm not the biggest fan of it. I still think Iron Assets in the middle is better. That's my personal take, but I could see an argument for it, but I'm not the biggest fan of it by any means. But it looks like we end up getting Young, Wild, and Free. So if that's the case, then we have to take over encumbered. I don't think there's an augment that's even remotely good enough to be taking in the spot. 1 for all is fine if you're playing around like Techie reroll. I guess we've seen a little bit of like this like reroll 1-cost Techie board, but first off, I don't know the line well enough to really talk about it enough. I saw it pop off a little bit in like the tail end of the latter portion of Project PvE, but I don't know it well enough to be like, oh, you could totally take it in this spot, especially when we're considering our item slams right now. We had Sword, Glove, and Chain. We did slam the Steadfast, but that typically indicates AD. And I think actually, funny enough, YBY1 ends up slamming a Steadfast Heart, which is I think an item that gets ridiculed all the time across the NA ladder because it's just objectively so much worse than like a lot of other whatchamacallit, a lot of other tank items. But I mean, I think it's fine. Also really interesting to note here as well, our board's actually weaker. I think we actually have the Draven 1 on our board instead of the Fiddlesticks that we just took off of it, and I think that's fine. I think the thought process is we want to be able to hold Draven and Vi just to make sure that we could potentially play for Cypher, but I don't, or I guess actually, you know what, I don't even think that's true, because I think realistically speaking, he could have held Fiddle and Draven and Vi. He has the money for it. So I'm a little shocked to see that he sells the Fiddlesticks here. I do think it's a small error. It's not a big error, but it's a tiny error that I don't think is particularly that great. I do wonder if also, like, if Kane was better by any means, just to get a little bit of that extra Divinicore on our board, but his bonus is just armor MR on our board, and I don't think a Zyra with no items is really going to pump enough damage. So I do like the Street Demon tech in here, just making sure that we can, one, make 10, but two, get a little bit of those bonus stats from the Street Demon trait, just to make sure that our Zyra can pump out a bit more damage, because especially this is a pattern across all casters, but without any mana item, it's like significantly less damage output than you would like, especially in order to try and close out some fights. Does look like we're gonna win here, so we are on a 2-win streak here. We are open sword, and just judging on the Steadfast Heart Slam, it does seem like we are leaning towards AP. I think this IE Slam is fine, but you do end up leaning, you have to play AD if you take an IE Slam, right? And IE really only screams Xayah to me. I don't think there are any right now 4-cost AD carries that can really utilize IE super well outside of Xayah. I think this IE item just in general just feels a lot worse this set. Aphelios and Zeri both really like Ginzis. We don't have any bows, and I think if you're playing around AD lines, you kind of want to have a bow somewhere that's available. We do have the Trojan Slam here as well, which I think is great. And right now, I think the lean is going to be some type of AP sort of flex. This has been a very, very, very popular line that we've seen throughout basically the course of not only just Project PvE, but across any high elo scrims, excuse me. You're gonna see a lot of AP flex, and it's a lot of strategists, it's a lot of Ziggs, a lot of Annie, a lot of Nico, and it's a great line, but it's highly congested. So it's one of those lines that if we do end up playing into it, we want to make sure that we are not in a situation that's putting us in a spot where it's like, well, shit, now I have these AP items and all these management items, but the line is 4-way contestant, there's nothing I can do. The other AP line that you could really play into is actually going to be Vex. I think that is something that is less common, but I think it's less common because of recency bias. Right now, or actually not right now, but previously, Vex was actually bugged like really bad to the point where her spell wouldn't even cast at a certain point. The conditions for her spell not casting were very complicated, and it would depend. There were like multiple different ways that it could happen, but generally speaking, a lot of players have not been playing Vex, or it hasn't really been back on their radar. So I think recently we're starting to see Vex come back up again. The most common, I think the most common variation is like a 4-Slayer, it's like a 4-Slayer vertical Divinicore board. It's really interesting because it fits really well with Mundo. It fits well with because you get Bruiser right with the Gragas, but you also get the Sun on your board. We get Slayer, plus I think it's Jarvan for Vanguard that works well with Kayn, and then you get the Zed on your board. And the Zed unit has been looking pretty fucking good. So this game, it could go either way. I think Shojin just keeps us open to both options. And again, I think a lot of scouting is super important. I think YBY1 also, funny enough, if you unmuted his stream, I can't speak Vietnamese, but he is like losing his mind over the fact that there's so many Ginsu Slammers and so many people seem to be playing Zeri this game. So he's just like, what the fuck is going on? It looks like we do get a rod and a bow as well, so we could potentially play into Zeri. That's not gonna happen though. We do have a Shojin. We get a couple more components out of Over Encumbered, the new version of it, in case you don't remember. It's now 2 slots, 2 components. So you, instead of having 1 bench slot, you get 2 bench slots, and you also get 2 components instead of 3. So I'm not sure if I'm the biggest fan of this change, but it's fine, I guess. I think it's good enough. We do end up getting the Spark Slam and the red buff, so it does look like we are leaning towards AP, but I think the name of the game right now with an open belt is going to be probably like some sort of like a Warmogs or a Redemption, and then we'll go from there. Maybe Nashers if we want to really lean into that AP strategist line. But with these items for Vex especially, you're going to want like some sort of like Rabadons or damage multiplier. Going to 3-2 augments here, we got Starry Knight, Sated Spellweaver, and Scavenger. None of these are good from this particular spot. There's no reroll that really makes sense because we don't have any of the 2 costs that we would want for a particular reroll. I think there's also a TF reroller in the lobby as well. So not the biggest fan of Starry Night here. I don't think Sated is great as well. I would actually just reroll all 3. I wouldn't even really think about it. I don't think any of these are really particularly that amazing here. We get the Trait Tracker, Gragas Hero Augment, and Slammin'. I don't know too much about this Gragas Hero Augment. I think this is one of those augments that's like pretty good. That's a fucking lie. It's not good. I don't know why I said that. I don't think it's very good. I've yet to see somebody do well with it. It's cool, and I think like if we had the right items for it, maybe consider it. But to be honest with you, I don't even know what the itemizations would look like. It's probably like it's probably similar to like Steb, like Archangel's BT and like something from set 13. But I'm curious to see like how this augment fares. I think right now, especially because this is a tournament setting and there's too little data, like nobody really knows if this augment's good or not yet. Maybe you can look at meta TFT and check the stats out, but as of right now, especially off the top of my head, I have no fucking clue how to really gauge the strength of this augment. We also don't have a Gragas, so it's not like we have a Gragas 2 right on 3-2. Slammin' is fine as well. I actually don't really mind Slammin' here, but YBY1, and this is what I love about this guy. This guy sees Trait Tracker, and I don't know if you noticed the speed of how quickly he like reroll the other 2 once he saw Trait Tracker, but that's sort of an indication of like I'm gonna take Trait Tracker. And the reason why he takes Trait Tracker here is because of a particularly interesting reason. If you look at our board right now, we actually have 5 active traits, and this set in particular, with Divinicore being back into the set, which is sort of like Guild or Heavenly from previous sets, it's really easy to flex in a bunch of different traits, and a lot of traits in this current, or sorry, a lot of units in this current set actually have 3 traits. So it's actually a lot easier than before, I would argue, especially compared to set 13 when it comes to trying to activate your trait tracker. Now there's a bunch of different trait tracker options that are available that you could, if you really wanted to, you could try to memorize them, try to figure them out. But I like the way the YBY1 kind of approached this set, or not the set, but rather this game, where he took it because, and he knew he could took it because he's looking at his traits on the left side. He knows he has 5. He really only needs 3 more. It's super easy to find that. And as we can see here, actually, he already solved it. He solved this super fast because it does not require that much thinking to just fit in 3 more traits with like potentially like 3 more units, right? He only had 5 units in. He just put in that second Mordekaiser in. So it should be really not too hard to try to fit those last ones in. It does look like, I think he didn't put the Kayn into his planner, but I think Kayn fits in really well with the Jarvan that he has in mind for the Slayer as well. And Vanguard, like there's so much that you can do. This middle unit is fantastic for Trait Tracker as well, holding on to 3 different traits. So as you can see, like look at this, like he's already done, this is level 8 board. Like that's exactly what he's gonna go for. And there's no 4 costs that are actually in that planner. So it's super easy for him to find all of his units. It's not gonna be too difficult. YBY1, you might have noticed also his leveling intervals are really interesting. He doesn't really follow the standard of like, oh, I level on 3-2 to 6, or oh, I level to level 8 on 4-1 or 4-2. He's a player who's really good at gauging his strength of his economy and then gauging whether or not that's going to be enough for him to push to the next level and start rolling. So as you can see, because it's low economy, we have 0 gold augments or 0 gold income by any means. We're actually pumping super slow. I'm not the biggest fan of leaving it in the XP bar. I actually prefer buying units and then keeping those on your bench. But if you want to just like stay not dizzy, I think that's fine as well. I think the most optimal, technically optimal play is to buy the units out of your shop instead of pumping XP, because you're gonna want to activate the Trait Tracker somehow, and there might be some sort of variation that exists that like makes it even easier because you're already natural to the units. You just didn't notice it at the time. We're kind of tunnel visioning onto the current Trait Tracker, but I think that's okay. So YBY1, this is a pretty interesting spot, right? So we took over encumbered. We didn't know what kind of components we get, but now we have a red buff that makes sense. And so far, nothing seems super dizzy or difficult. But I think this Trait Tracker augment in general makes a lot of players super dizzy because they don't really know what to do when they are forced to play into Trait Tracker. Now, also, before we talk about that, throughout the scouting, I don't know if you noticed, a lot of players have very high caps this game. Last Stand player, another player had like a very high like Cypher setup. There's a lot of very high capped boards in this lobby, so this lobby is super fucking strong. So keep in mind that the cap of our board is going to need to be super high, and we need to make sure that on our roll down with Trait Tracker, we don't get too dizzy to really fuck up anything that's going to be going on. So right now we're 75 HP. We've preserved quite a bit going into stage 4, which I think is great. And like we talked about before, the egg is going to be super invaluable as the game progresses, because we do want to hatch it and make sure that we have enough HP to hatch it comfortably. Cash, for example, at the bottom, actually, so 2 players. So Superette, I believe there's a Chinese player, and Cash, they're both super low on HP. Well, Superette's a little, actually much healthier than Cash, but cash is actually much lower because he's playing like this super giga like win out like cipher board, which I think is fine, but it's gonna be really hard for him to cash out, no pun intended, the egg. YBY1, by the way, he's actually not even just 75 HP, he's actually 85 because of his current the green orb actually on his arena. He's not picked up the whole time. This is going away later, by the way, so don't get used to this, but he does not take it because it's technically the most optimal for carousel priority to not pick up the 10 HP until you absolutely need to. So he's actually 85 HP. He's actually very healthy. We are, by the way, in case you can't read the egg or maybe you've not seen this before, basically we're given a chance to hash an egg after 4 turns, after 9 turns, or after 13 turns, right? So we do want to scout around and see what's going on here. If you're playing for like a super win out, I do think like the 13 turn one is fine. I think not enough players really try to opt into it. But to be fair, I have not seen, this is, I think during watching the tournament was the first time I ever really got to see the egg. So it's a little hard for me to say like, oh yeah, it should be 13 when you have this much HP. But at the end of the day, 9 seems to be the default that everybody runs to, because if you scout the lobby and you see everybody takes 9, there's really no harm in just taking 9 as well, assuming that you think you'll be able to cash it out pretty comfortably, and 9 is not too difficult to cash out. 13 can be a bit tricky, and I don't really know if the payoff is good enough. I'd have to check into the tables, but 9 does seem to be pretty common. 13 seems to be the, if you are going to try to win out. I believe Cash actually took a 13 in this game, but I could be incorrect. Oh, excuse me, YB1 actually takes 13 as well, so I think that's great. And I think that actually makes a lot of sense. Oh, by the way, our tree tracker is activated as well, which is super cool. 13 is great because I think it makes sense. If we're scouting the lobby here, I think we talked about it earlier. This guy's, oh my god, he's forward thinking with Cypher, and another guy is Last Stand also with Cypher. And I think there's a lot of really high cap boards, so YB1 actually wants to go for the highest cash out. So we'll be able to see exactly what that cash out is going to look like, which I think is going to be useful information. If anyone's at the table, by the way, or know where I can find it, please let me know. I'm sure Meta TFT or somebody has it, but I'd have to double check. Anyways, going into our 4-2 augments here. So we do activate the tracker, so you can see on the left hand side the orbs are available, and obviously we should know what, you know, traits we're working with before we actually pick our augment here. That's super important because it's going to dictate a lot of direction here. So let's talk about the traits real quick. We're given Slayer, Ox Force, Techie, Dynamo, Bruiser, Anima. Okay, this is the part where I think a lot of players are getting dizzy, because they're looking at this shit and they go, what the fuck is going on, right? Not only that, we have red buff Shojin. We have been thinking this whole time that we were going to play AP, but now we have 2 swords, right? One we actually took off Carousel, which bit of an interesting decision, but second, we have another sword, right? So now if you're looking at these items, right, the item combinations that make the most sense from these items is probably going to be something like BT Hodge. Yeah, and if you remember from earlier, we did talk about how Zed and Vex is a potential option. So already, based off these current items and our current traits, we can think, okay, cool, the Vex board and this Vex Zed board that we were already considering does make sense, right? It fits holistically with the items. It fits holistically with some of the traits. It doesn't have to fit all of them, but it fits with some of the traits, right? The Bruiser makes sense. The Slayer makes sense. Oxforce could potentially, Oxforce maybe with like a Viego, we could tech it in somehow. Potentially Dynamo could fit because Divinicore with Morgana, right? We have ways to like work some of these traits in, and I think we could identify that relatively as you get better pretty quickly. So I think this is one way the YBY1 is really great, is that he's thinking about his lines, seeing how well it fits, and then if it doesn't fit, we gotta think about another game plan pretty quickly. But in this scenario, it does seem to work out, so we do have a game plan in mind that isn't too difficult. So we do have augment wise, we do have needlessly large rods, not necessarily that great. We do also have Find Your Center and Rolling for Days. I don't hate this one, but you can't really use Find Your Center very well, so we definitely reroll the left side here. We get, I believe this is Mana Flow. Doesn't make a lot of sense because, again, we have to play AP and 80 because we are thinking about playing a dual carry setup with these items. So it's not Mana Flow either. It doesn't make a lot of sense here. I think it does consider because potentially he could play around strategies with another Shojin, but the other sword just gets really awkward. He ends up getting the last one here. I believe this is Climb the Ladder. Also not fantastic, but it could maybe do fine. Also reroll the right side here, see if we can find anything better. End up getting, sorry, I believe this one is, oh, they're both Climb the Ladder, excuse me. This is Climb the Ladder Silver, but I believe this is also Corrosion, the armor and MR reduction one. Don't really need it, we have a Spark already. We end up getting Last Stand, sorry, not Last Stand, Health as Wealth and Pandora's Items. This is very good. Very fucking good. And do you know why this is very good? It's good, and you should know this. Trait Tracker on 3-2 means 4-2 click Pandora's almost every time. Don't forget that. The reason I say that is because you can reroll the emblems. super good. So now health is wealth actually helps alleviate our current economy problem of we're too poor. And by the way, look at this, like we discussed earlier, a lot of players, especially like in masters, would probably level here on 4-2 because they're thinking 4-2 is a standard interval. I gotta level here and I gotta start spiking my board. I just got my cash out, I gotta make sure I'm doing good. No, make sure that you're evaluating your economy properly, because as you can tell, we're still too poor. If we were to level in this spot, we do not have the economy to properly pivot our board into what we need. We'd probably, realistically, if you level to 8 on 4-2 now in this spot, you would probably not have enough to find Vex 2 and Z2 amongst all your other upgrades with Divinity Core, because you don't have a lot of those units just yet. We do find the Mordekaiser 2 here as well, which I think is good enough. That is something that we can consider. But as you can see, the Y1 is slowly already putting the items together. Now, you might be wondering, or you might be thinking, like, dude, this guy just found Trade Tracker and then Pandora's items. Like, he's just gonna find his fucking shit and it's gonna be chill. But it's like, you might be watching this being like, how do you get dizzy from this spot? But you have to understand, like, piloting this in-game is very different than watching it from the sidelines. It's a lot easier to watch from the sidelines, especially when you can pause the video and think about it, right? But because of the way that he's managing his economy, because he understands and can identify very quickly what kind of line he needs to play, that is what's preventing him from getting dizzy. And that's what's preventing him from having all of these hesitations when it comes to his roll downs, right? Because when you are playing TFT, especially modern TFT, right, where it's not as much cooking, it's more like identifying, it's like a line selection and then flexing around the line. That is what modern TFT is all about nowadays. And so with YBY1, he's really making sure that he is flexing his line to make sure it's proper, but while doing so, making sure that he's still playing his strongest board every single turn. So let's talk about the roll down here real quick. We're gonna put this at regular speed here because we gotta talk about it. Finds the Zac and he puts it in pretty early, which I don't really particularly enjoy. I think it's technically the most optimal, but it's also really difficult because you have to buy so many different units. We are pivoting pretty quickly here, not finding anything in particular. We find the Cho'Gath, which is great. He didn't buy the second one, which is pretty unfortunate, but I do believe he has to hold 2 because he does have a Bruiser Crest that he could play into. He finds the Senate 2, which is nice. We are looking for Vex 2. That's going to be our biggest upgrade here. Does find at least, finds both Vexes 2, which is super great. And we have to make sure that we slam our items here just to make sure that we are not going to be Pandorazing anything very important. Going to put it back up to 1.5x speed here. We did find the Vex 2, which is great. And by the way, again, only possible because we managed our economy so well this game and we were patient, making sure that we were still playing strong boards, making sure that we didn't pivot too early to make sure that we had the economy to fund our Vex 2 so that we could, despite the fact that we're losing these fights, we're still relatively pretty healthy. That's not a 27, by the way. That's a 37 because we still have that orb that's sitting on our board. It seems here that I apologize for this screen flickering, by the way. I don't really know why his stream was doing this, but it was flickering for a little while. I think he was running into some technical issues, but it goes away pretty soon, so I apologize. But anyways, it looks like we are gonna we found a Z as well, so we can finally put our items onto it. I think that's fine as well. We're not really rolling for like super upgrades in this spot, but we are looking for like a Z, like a single Z, just so we can hold our items. TG the Cho'Gath here, I think that's okay. We do want to hold on to the Slayer emblem as well. That's going to be super important because it fits onto our board, but everything fits now. All of our emblems fit, which is super great, and we are going to be in a spot that is super comfortable very soon. Again, we are not 27, we're 37 HP here, so look at the Z unit, by the way. Still losing, but 2 unit loss, perfectly chill, and these losses have been fantastic. So despite the fact that we lost all stage 4, we're actually not super unhealthy. We're actually in a spot that is still relatively pretty comfortable, and we're very close to spiking an incredible amount, right? So we get the Morgana in here, which is fine as well. Divinity Core onto the Z is, I think, okay. Bruiser Emblem on him as well, I think that's fine. I'm not the biggest fan of it. There are definitely better items here, but I do think he wants to make sure that he doesn't accidentally roll it. Z out of the orb, which is fine as well. I do like Hodge a lot in this spot here just to get that next Z item. I think a second BT is probably okay. QSS is fine as well. We're gonna roll down again, try to just complete our board here. We are looking for Z2. That one Renekton is super important. We do get the Gragas back onto the board for 4 Bruiser, which is super great. I think this Zac has overstayed its welcome. I do think we can change it for 7 Divinity Core. I do think there's a very big spike, especially after the Morgana too. But after this turn, by the way, we still have not finished our pivot. We're still looking for that Z2. We're still looking for that Cho'Gath 2. And it is tough, by the way. In case you can't see it, his ping on the top right is 212. He's playing from Vietnam on the NAPB server. So it's very difficult for him to like make all these adjustments so quickly. And this in particular, I think we've talked about this before. You have to make so many decisions within one turn. It's so difficult to complete your turn within one turn. So making sure that here, I think he gets the Cho'Gath 2, which is great. He ends up selling the Zac, which I think is the correct call here, because now his tank is actually super beefed up. or super beefed up, excuse me. But I think they're looking solid. I think you can move this Bruiser Crest onto the Renekton now. I think that looks fine to me. And then you can move, the QSS onto the Senna here for extra damage. And honestly, we are looking really, really good. So now it's finally 5-2. It took us 4, maybe 5 turns even. I would say 4 turns. It depends if you include neutrals. But it took us so long to get here, right? But we're finally in a spot that we actually feel comfortable and good. And that's what I also really like about this line, by the way, is that it's a line that not only is it a line that doesn't require him to go 9, and he knew his economy situation was pretty poor. He chose a line that was gonna cap out in a way that he thinks is gonna be solid enough that he can just keep rolling on 8, find a lot of really good strong unit quality, and not worry too much about having to go 9 in order to actually win out. So really good line selection from YBY1, and it looks like our cash out was 2 more components, or it might have been 3, and a Fawn as well. So we actually got a lot of even more damage on our board because we're able to tech in this Aurora onto our board for a little bit of that extra Dynamo, which is great because Dynamo actually buffs the whole board. Every single unit gets extra mana. I think Dynamo gets double the mana bonus, I believe. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's correct. Dude, this board is looking so good now. We're 7 Divinicore, we're 4 Bruiser, 4 Slayer. Everything is looking immaculate. At this point, I mean, I'd have to look at the board again just to see like what we would need. But by the way, have you noticed nobody's died yet? Cash has cashed out his thing already, so his Cypher bonus is looking fucking solid, right? But everybody in this lobby, especially those who are trying to cap out super high, are still alive, meaning they were actually able to finally finish their transitions as well and make sure that their boys were capped out super well. We get the GS out of the Senna here. I think that makes perfect sense. We have a 3-item Senna here. Something interesting to note actually about Renekton, and this is something that I've noticed a little more commonly, I don't know how I feel about it though, is that I think people are starting to realize that having Renekton bite out Senna is actually not a terrible idea. The reason I say that is because you kind of want the Gragas to be in the front line to soak aggro immediately, but also Renekton doesn't necessarily need to be eating a beefy unit. He can actually also eat units with high AD or high base AD. And what's nice about Senna is that because she is a Slayer in this 4 Slayer variation, obviously this one is you have 2 Slayer spats, so you have a little bit of extra. But even without it, in the common Divinicore 4 Slayer board, you can actually get a lot of base AD to Senna because of her Slayer trait, and Renekton can take a bite out of her at the very beginning of combat to really bolster up the Renekton and give him a lot of stats. I think that is something that I've been seeing a lot more recently, but I'm interested to see or hear your thoughts about what you think about biting into Senna rather than a beef unit as well. I think biting into the Zed is fine as well. He gets all Divinicore bonuses, so he actually gets, because of the emblem, Divinicore, Omnivamp, right, on top of the BT. So I think that's super fine as well. I don't like the itemization super well, but I do think that this GS, potentially we could have moved it onto the Zed, and instead of the Bruiser emblem, we could have done a GS. But we don't have anybody that can particularly hold the Bruiser emblem, so, you know, it's up for debate. But I still think that could have been good. I mean, maybe we could have Bruiser Kane. I think that might have been slightly more optimal, but it is very close. Zed itemization, by the way, in case you didn't know already, there's a new itemization build that's kind of been going around recently, which I think is really cool, which is a blue buff, I believe it's blue buff BTQSS is, I believe, the build, which I think is super fascinating. It's not, we've seen blue buff holders for melee units in the past, but this is the first time I think this one actually has legs, right? Like Gwen with blue buff back in set 9 is sort of the last one I can remember, but that unit has always felt very iffy, right, throughout the entire course of the set. But blue buff Zed actually looks really promising. Now you just have to be careful though, because if you hear blue buff BTQSS, you're kind of thinking that doesn't sound like there's a lot of damage, right? It sounds like you're lacking like an IE or a Hodge to really, you know, make sure that Zed is actually assassinating units, and you would be correct, except for the fact that Zed's trait is Slayer, that actually offers a bunch of base AD. So again, inside of Divinicore, if you have like Hodge, if you have blue buff BT QSS, you should be playing Vertical Slayer. And then that way you get a lot of base AD into Zed, and then Zed can actually do some incredible work. So as you can see here, we actually level here for 6 Slayer as well with the Jarvan and the Vayne, which I think is very, very, very good. And yes, even though Aurora unit quality wise might be better because it is giving us extra units on our board, 6 Slayer is so much base AD, right? So now we're in the spot where this Zed is gonna really start popping off. So despite the fact not having any AD items to really help him like make sure that he can do damage, if we watch the Zed closely in this fight, as you can see here, cast onto the Ziggs here. Already doing a lot of damage and already actually just assassinating it, is in the backline right now, just cleaning up the ante. Look at that, man. It's absolute cinema. So fucking well done. Looks like we have secured our top 3 as well. Looks like Title, Dazzlo are left in the lobby. So it looks like it's going to be a very, very close one. But again, all the players who were playing for cash out, they're dead now. Which is, I think, really interesting. I think it was Cash and Super were the 2 that had like super giga spots, but they unfortunately were not able to clean. So this is just showcasing, by the way, just how unbelievably strong YBY1's board currently is. No Cypher was necessary, but because of the trade tracker and really understanding not only our line and our conditions, but understanding like we basically had a game plan from the almost the very beginning all the way throughout the whole thing, right? And that's what's really interesting about TFT, is that nowadays, if you really want to succeed, you should have a pretty concrete enough game plan in mind that it makes the game a lot easier for you to navigate, so you are never dizzy. But that is going to be securing a first for YBY1, and that's going to basically do it for this VOD review. Unfortunately, for those of you who are curious about YBY1's placements throughout the Project PvE Major, he actually went 1-1-1 after the first 3 games, but then I think his scores after were 8-6-8. And then that put him at 30 points, which unfortunately was 1 point shy of qualifying for the checkmate format. So we almost had a timeline where YBY1 could have played in the checkmate format, but unfortunately it just was not the case. So we won't be able to see the beast from the Vietnam server anymore for the Project PvE Major, which really sucks. I love watching this guy play, but I hope you guys will still join us for the Project PvE Major. Title did still make it. I believe Kaito from the JP server made it. Marcel P's in it as well from North America. A lot of really still fantastic players are in it, so I highly recommend checking out the stream when you get a chance. It's going to be at Watanabe_Kai. You can find it there. But I hope this was helpful. Again, I apologize for talking a little bit quietly. I need to stop doing VOD reviews at like 4 in the morning. My sleep schedule is super messed up, but that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys learned something. Take care, guys, and happy climbing.